Your wool coat is gone. You step outside before dawn, and the cold reaches your shirt at once. The packed earth is white with frost. Smoke hangs beneath the roof, and your hands must still milk a cow, split kindling, or carry water. How did medieval peasants survive winter without wool? The first surprise is that many of them did not survive without it at all. Wool was one of the main materials of medieval clothing, and the evidence begins with the sheep that produced it. Across medieval Europe, sheep were kept for meat, milk, manure, and fleece. A single animal could yield roughly 1 to several kilograms of raw wool in a year, depending on its breed and care. The fleece had to be shorn, washed, teased apart, spun into thread, and woven or felted. Each step took labor, but the raw material grew again on the animal's back. Why, then, does the question feel so natural? Modern winter clothing is sold as a single finished object. A medieval peasant's protection was usually a set of materials and habits spread through the household. A wool tunic, a linen shirt, leather shoes, a cap, a cloak, a straw mattress, and a fire managed hour by hour. Remove one layer and another takes its place. The word peasant also hides enormous differences. A shepherd in the Scottish Highlands faced a different winter from a tenant farmer in northern France, a villager near Novgorod, or a household in Mediterranean Italy. Climate, local animals, access to forests, crop harvests, and legal rights over fuel changed the answer. Archaeology gives us fragments, not one universal peasant wardrobe. At Viking Age and medieval sites around the North Sea, archaeologists repeatedly find evidence for wool textile production. At Coppergate in York, dated mainly to the 10th century, excavators recovered spindle whorls, weaving equipment, textile fragments, and tools associated with cloth making. The objects show that spinning and weaving took place in ordinary urban households, not only in elite workshops. A spindle whorl is small, but it answers a large question. It is the weighted disc mounted on a spindle, keeping the shaft turning as loose fibers are drawn into thread. Thousands have been found across Europe. Where wool grew locally, the whorl points to a household converting fleece into clothing or blankets. Linen production left a different trail. Flax seeds, redding evidence, spindle whorls suited to fine thread, and scraps of woven plant fiber. What did the wool itself become? A family might spin it into yarn and weave a plain cloth for a tunic, skirt, hood, or blanket. Coarser fibers could be felted into dense material. Fulling, which involved wetting and beating woven cloth, tightened the fibers and made fabric warmer and more wind-resistant. The Bayeux tapestry, made in the 11th century, is an elite embroidered object rather than peasant clothing, but its wool and linen materials demonstrate the textile technology available in the period. Wool also mattered because it stayed warm when damp. That property was useful in a climate where rain, sleet, and muddy work were routine. Linen, by contrast, was cooler and less insulating, but it touched the skin comfortably, dried more quickly, and could be washed more often. A common layered arrangement placed a washable linen shift beneath heavier wool clothing. The inner layer reduced dirt and sweat reaching the expensive outer fabric. Modern homes keep you warm by sealing a heated room around your body. Medieval houses usually heated a smaller space. At West Stow in Suffolk, an Anglo-Saxon settlement dated from the 5th to the 7th centuries. Reconstructed and excavated buildings show the basic principle: timber walls, thatched roofs, earthen floors, and a central hearth. Smoke management varied by building and period, but the fire's heat was concentrated where people cooked, worked, and slept. The roof mattered as much as the fire. Thatch trapped air and could provide better insulation than a thin wall of unplastered timber. Wattle and daub walls, made from woven sticks covered with clay-rich plaster, blocked drafts when maintained. An open hearth lost heat upward, yet a low room with several people, cooking pots, stored food, and sleeping animals could remain warmer than the outdoor air. It was smoky. It was not necessarily freezing. What happened after the fire went out? Bedding carried much of the night's burden. Medieval inventories and excavations mention or reveal mattresses stuffed with straw, rushes, leaves, or other plant material. At medieval waterlogged sites, preserved organic remains can include wooden furniture, textile fragments, and plant matter, though survival depends heavily on wet, dry, or waterlogged conditions. A straw-filled mattress was not a soft modern bed, but it held still air and lifted the body away from a cold floor. People also slept in layers. A cloak could become a blanket. A hood could remain on the head. In some houses, several family members shared a sleeping platform, while livestock occupied part of the building or an adjoining space. Body heat helped, though crowding increased smoke exposure and disease risks. Medieval survival involved trade-offs that modern heating hides. At what point did clothing stop being enough? The answer depended on calories. Your body generates heat by oxidizing food, and cold increases the energy needed to maintain temperature, especially during physical work. Medieval communities prepared for winter through autumn slaughter, grain storage, preserved vegetables, dried fish, salted meat, cheese, beer, and legumes. A bowl of pottage supplied carbohydrates and sometimes fat or protein. An occasional piece of pork or bacon added valuable energy. This is where archaeology becomes personal. At Wharram Percy, the deserted medieval village in Yorkshire, excavations of houses, middens, animal bones, and human burials reveal a farming community occupied for centuries. The bones show disease, injury, and hard labor, while the animal remains show the changing importance of cattle, sheep, pigs, and other foods. They do not provide a neat menu for every winter, but they show that diet, work, and vulnerability were tied together. A cold day was more dangerous for someone already underfed. Stable isotope studies of medieval human remains can indicate broad dietary patterns, while skeletal evidence may reveal episodes of nutritional stress. These methods cannot tell us exactly what one family ate on a particular December night. They can show that winter survival was a biological problem as well as a clothing problem. If wool was so useful, why did some households lack enough of it? Sheep ownership was unequal. Lords, monasteries, and wealthier farmers could control larger flocks, while landless laborers might receive payment in grain, food, or second-hand garments. Fleece could be sold, taxed, or assigned to other work. A peasant might own a sheep, share access to a flock, or buy yarn at a market, but none of those arrangements guaranteed a new winter cloak every year. Clothing was repaired until the fabric failed. Patches could be sewn over worn elbows and knees. Old garments could be cut down for children, turned into mittens, used as linings, or combined with scraps from several sources. Medieval wills and household inventories, especially from later medieval towns, sometimes list gowns, hoods, blankets, sheets, and worn clothing. These records mainly represent people with property and literacy or access to scribes, so they cannot stand for every rural household. They still show that fabric was counted as an asset. Could plant fibers replace wool completely? In some regions, linen did much of the work close to the body. Flax grows well in parts of northern Europe, and linen thread was strong, smooth, and easier to wash. Hemp could produce durable cloth and cordage. Neither gave the same warmth as a thick woolen textile, but a linen shirt beneath a wool or leather outer layer reduced heat loss and protected the more difficult-to-clean garment. Fur and hides filled another gap. Sheepskins, goatskins, and cattle hides could become footwear, gloves, belts, aprons, or coverings. Fur was especially useful for trimming or lining garments, though fine furs were expensive and socially marked. The famous medieval fur trade, visible in written records and archaeological finds from places such as Novgorod, carried beaver, squirrel, marten, and other pelts across long distances. A village worker might use locally available hide, while imported fur belonged to a different economic world. Leather shoes were often the weak point. Archaeologists at York, London, and other waterlogged medieval sites have recovered hundreds of leather shoes, many with repairs and reused soles. They show practical construction and repeated mending, but leather is not automatically warm. People stuffed footwear with straw, rags, or other plant material, used thicker soles, and tried to keep feet dry. Wet feet made cold work far more dangerous. How did people manage when the winter was exceptionally severe? They reduced exposure where possible. Farm work slowed, travel became harder, and indoor tasks such as spinning, mending, tool repair, brewing, and food preparation filled more hours. Seasonal labor was planned around daylight and weather, although survival rarely allowed complete rest. A person still had to feed animals, clear snow or mud, fetch fuel, and protect stored grain. Historical climate records add another complication. The period often called the medieval climate anomaly was not one uniformly warm age across Europe. Conditions varied by region and decade. From the 14th century onward, parts of Europe entered a cooler period commonly called the Little Ice Age, though the timing and intensity differed. Tree rings, lake sediments, glacier records, written weather observations, and harvest accounts show fluctuations rather than one simple trend. A household in 1100 did not face the same winter as one in 1450. The most dangerous shortage may have been fuel. Medieval forests were not endless private reserves waiting for anyone to collect wood. Rights to gather branches, cut timber, or graze animals were often regulated by manorial custom and law. Peat served as fuel in parts of Britain and Ireland. Dried dung could be burned where wood was scarce. Straw had competing uses as bedding and roofing, so using it for fire carried a cost. What, then, did a poor household actually need? It needed enough calories to make body heat, a roof that limited drafts, fuel that lasted through the cold months, and clothing that could be layered and repaired. Wool helped with the outer layers, but survival came from a system. Linen kept skin and wool cleaner. Straw separated bodies from floors. Thatch and plaster slowed heat loss. Shared sleeping space conserved warmth. Stored food kept the body working when the sun set early. This system could fail. A late harvest, livestock disease, war, fire, flood, or loss of access to woodland could turn an uncomfortable winter into a deadly one. Medieval people were not naturally adapted to cold, and they did not possess a secret material that made winter harmless. They relied on local resources, accumulated skills, and cooperation inside households and villages. Those advantages were real, but they were fragile. So the missing wool coat leads somewhere unexpected. Medieval peasants usually had wool in some form, but often in rough, reused, uneven garments rather than the single dependable coat, When wool was scarce, linen, hemp, hide, fur, straw, thatch, fire, food, and shared body heat formed the layers around them. The archaeological record at York, West Stow, Wharram Percy, and hundreds of smaller settlements preserves pieces of that arrangement. A spindle whorl, a shoe sole, a hearth, a sheep bone, a patch of cloth. The final measure of medieval winter clothing is not whether it looked comfortable. It is whether a household could keep working until spring. At Wharram Percy, occupation continued for centuries through changing crops, diseases, prices, and climates. And its excavated houses still show where people cooked, slept, stored food, and kept animals. The winter coat was only one part of the answer. The bed, the bread, and the fire finished the job.